in fact, the calligraphy that you see later in non-Quranic text is actually deriving from the attempt of representing in the most beautiful way the Quran. And as they finish memorizing the Quran, writing a copy, some of these copies get written 2-3 times. Because the sheikh would verify and see if a sadda is missing. Or you have cut the line where you were not supposed to cut it. It doesn't entail repeating one page. It entails repeating the entire text. It means you have not yet mastered. You haven't become hafiz. You're not hafiz. You have to deserve it. And so, to see that the knowledge was brought in here and was kept in its actually, it's what authentic forms, really, if you think about it. Because if you see these texts and you compare them with the texts that are written here, they're all mostly derived from classical Arabic. And that is from the closest to the original forms that my brother was talking about. And that's why I just have to say that I'm most humbled, and I hope this will be a beginning of an enduring collaboration. And I just hope that someone, a young man or a young woman, is going to pick up this and apply for admission to Boston University's anthropology or history, and would argue that he would be coming to bring all these threads together in one dissertation. And I look forward to that opportunity. So please, if you have a young man or a young woman who has interest in this amazing area, I think this is going to be, I suspect over the next few years, this is going to be a significant area, because no one has really made those connections in tangible ways using data that is available. And I think this will highlight and uncover new insights that will force revision of various aspects of the history of people of African descent in Africa and outside of Africa. So I am most humbled, and thank you very much. I bring more than I brought to you. Thank you.
Thank you, God. Alhamdulillah. But you know, we are, as you said, Africans like big, like a lot, like a dress, right? Well, us Americans like your juice. So we're going to let you come back up and we'll ask questions. We want more big. So we'll bring up, y'all can come up and we'll open up for any questions. Come on, Dr. Muhammad. Tanji. And I do want you to begin, I want you to readdress the point I thought you said yesterday. I thought was really mind-opening when you talked about the difference between the French and the English colonial system and the different effects that it had. Okay.
Yeah, historically, there are two modes in Africa. There are two modes of colonization that were implemented. In the academic literature, the French are known and the Portuguese are known to be the ones who have enforced what we call the direct assimilation rule. And the British are known to have enforced the indirect assimilation rule. Although both are designed to exploit the resources, but the way to do it is different. For the British, they assume that the local social structures that were here in these communities, for example, if you go to the Ashanti or you go to the Wolof, the traditional social structure that was here had to be maintained, so that the chiefs become auxiliaries of the British system, and that way they ruled through them, okay? And they give them instructions and they exploit resources. For the French and the Portuguese, that was not the approach they chose. Their approach was first to assimilate the locals, to make them French, to make them believe that they're French. That French culture, French language, was the best in humanity. And if you make the Africans, the Senegalese are probably the best example, the most assimilated, that they sing La Marseillaise, that their ancestors were blue-eyed, blonde from France, and that the education system was a copy of the French system, so that speaking Wolof, if you get caught speaking an African language in the school, you have to wear a symbol, an ugly sign that you have to put on until you catch somebody else speaking Wolof to put it on him. It goes on and on and on and on, so that you're ashamed of your own languages and your own tradition. Well, the goal is, if you become so ashamed of your own culture and your own tradition, you will embrace the French ideals and the French culture. And therefore, if the French owns your mind, that they own everything you are. And that's the implication of the direct assimilation rule. The implications are very serious, because what happening then is the post-colonial generations have never been able to reorganize the educational system in Francophone Africa. So that the institutions that were there, that were created by the French, remained. And the result is you have highly educated populations who are very good at classics. I mean, you will find people with master's degrees in French, classic literature, etc., in Senegal, in Mali, I'm sure. But these are degrees of assimilation. What does the knowledge of Voltaire and Rimbaud for a Senegalese person? What can it do for you? And that's the problem. And so the leaders who are ruling most of Francophone countries are caught in this system. And actually, they genuinely think that they're doing their best. But the problem is, it's a fundamental problem. It's a continuation of the assimilation system. Whereas in the British system, it's different. For example, in my program, as the director of the African language program, which is the Title VI funded program, it's a government funded program, and the goal of the program is to train experts who are conversant in local languages, so that PhD students who are in history or anthropology do not have to rely on interpreters when they go to the field. They can access information. What's interesting, every semester for every student, we have about $5,000 to pay for between 6 to 10 weeks, between 6 to 8 weeks, for intensive training for those students. Guess what? In Francophone Africa, I have hard time to find someone to work with. In Anglophone Africa, it's set. Swahili students, when they go to Zanzibar, there's already a program, and as a result, these are the tangible economic dimension of not respecting yourself. And so that it's much easier for me to work with colleagues in Anglophone Africa, because their languages are taught, and they have created infrastructure for those to receive those students. So these are tangible implications of the consequences of the direct and indirect assimilation.
Okay, so you have a language program
Yes.
at Boston University.
Yes.
Okay. So you're saying that if you had a PhD student who was studying whatever in Senegal,
Yes.
that you would have a hard time
That's right.
placing them
Yes, yes.
in St. Louis or
It would be difficult.
Dakar to basically learn Wolof.
Yes, yes. Even if I have to do it, I have to use it through the Baobab Center, which is about the Baobab Center, which is run by a former Peace Corps volunteer.
Wow.
It's very sad. Very sad. Very sad. Because it's only the Baobab Center that knows that there is money to be made here. And they have recruited some Senegalese, have trained them to be able to capture that market. But the average Senegalese, the Minister of Education, kicked us out of his office because we were not talking about French. And that's not only Senegal. I mean, Senegal is probably the prime example. But it's the Francophone.
Cote d'Ivoire will be
It will be the same. It will be the same. That's very sad. And then I think that's one of the fundamental problems of Francophone Africa.
The reason I asked the question because I was recently in Marrakesh, Morocco, and well, there they have folks who will teach you,
yes,
Moroccan Arabic.
Yes.
But you can also learn the
Full
different
stop.
Berber-like
Yes.
dialects. They somehow or another they've retained their Berber language, although they've had to go through their own internal revolution to have that brought back on the stage. But they typically
there's a market.
Yeah.
But they'll speak French, they'll speak Arabic, they'll speak a Berber dialect, and these are people who basically haven't even graduated from high school.
Yeah. It's very sad. I traveled to Niger in 2007 to try to set up, because we had students who were doing Hausa, and we couldn't send them to northern Nigeria, especially where we had connections because it's not safe. So we decided we were going to try to place them somewhere, and Niger was a good place. Same problems. Same problems. Because French, it has been so deeply ingrained that the path to success or social mobility can only be through French. And the leadership believes that. So if you come and tell them, and when we met the Minister of Education, who was a Fulani speaker, of course, when we came, we had begun our contact with him, interacting with him, with a colleague from Harvard. Of course, when he heard 2 directors of African language programs were coming, he probably thought we would be bringing some money for French or whatever. But when he gave us an appointment, when we met him, the first question we asked him, he told me he's Pearl. I asked him, do you write Pearl and read Pearl? He thought I was rude. and he shortened the conversation by telling us he's busy. We were not serious. He didn't take us seriously. So I didn't have that problem when I talked to colleagues from Tanzania, Kenya, Ghana, because they see that, in fact, within 6 weeks, you have $5,000 for one student. If you have 20 students, how much money do you have? In for example, the Swahili Institute of the Institute of Kiswahili at the University of Dar es Salaam, it's one of the wealthiest units of the institution, because they have created the infrastructure to receive all these Title VI students. But in our case, it's a consequence of the direct assimilation system that is very sad. It's very, very sad. Sure.
Do you, as an anthropologist, looking at the similar educational structure, and I know you said the Francophone system was, I guess, the worst, but from my perspective, we as African Americans have the same issue. The educated African American who have assimilated to the extent that they think they have quote unquote arrived, speak differently and communicate differently to the extent that they can't even relate to, say, the people on the street here. And a lot of times they don't even bother to. So that's preventing us from giving the most effective form of dawah. Like, if you just think on a human to human level, the whole point of education is supposed to be to make you a better human, to make you a better Muslim, to be able to benefit humanity. So have you, maybe not to the same extent, but have you observed that even in the way that educated African Americans speak, I know among African Americans, if you speak in what they call Ebonics, or you write in Ebonics, then you're looked down upon as if you're less, not even necessarily educated, because African Americans do have a different way we communicate with each other, no matter our level of education, than we do with other people.
That's a good question. I'm not a specialist, of course, of African American English and education, but some of my students have brought up these issues in class, and we've talked about it. So I've mostly learned from them about these issues. But yeah, I can understand.
I want to say something, and I may be wrong, because I had, you know, I thought about it, and I want to go outside and Google it, and to make sure that I'm absolutely right. But what my brother is doing right there is historic, and it's historic at Boston University. And it's almost like a tradition, and I may be wrong, but when Malcolm X started as a minister under Elijah Muhammad, he was the first person to speak to a group of people that was outside of the temples of Islam. And it was because of an individual named Dr. Sierra Lincoln that attended Boston University. He arranged for Malcolm X to speak at Boston University, and that was the first time Malcolm X ever spoke, or any minister under Elijah Muhammad ever spoke to any group outside of the temple. And according to Dr. Sierra Lincoln,